Hey, everybody, welcome to the Rooftop Leadership Podcast. It's absolutely awesome to have you here. We're clicking right along through 2021 and one adventure after the other. And, the focus of this podcast is to talk about locally empowered leadership. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we focus on. I'm of the belief that in this country and other places around the world, we are in a bit of a leadership crisis right now. And by that, we are divided more than we are united, and that's causing some real issues at local, federal, regional levels, organizational levels. What I call the churn, this societal churn, which is dividing us and causing gaps between us and the people that we want to connect to, us and the goals that we're trying to achieve in the world. Because humans are meaning-seeking, emotional, social story animals, and connection is how we navigate the world. And right now, that is a tough thing to pull off. And I think a big reason for it is that many of our leaders are what I call divisionists. And I've coined that term to frame leaders on both sides of the aisle, leaders on all sides of the issues who divide citizens in order to achieve an agenda. And I think right now it's one of the most irresponsible things a leader can do. And so I'm calling it a leadership crisis. We are at a precipice right now that we can't hang around very long. We need to pull back from and restore responsible leadership at all levels that focuses on bridging beyond our in groups and connecting with other human beings, even those who don't believe the way we do. Because at the end of the day, that is what diversity looks like. It is what a liberal democracy looks like. And it's how we achieve abundance and individual freedoms, is that ability to do that. And it is a requisite for for stewarded leadership, for responsible leadership to step in and do that. So, sometimes on this podcast, I riff on my own. Sometimes I have guests, and the guests that I bring on are the guests who I believe can help you think through the challenges that you're facing in achieving and fulfilling on that locally empowered leadership, bottom line. And I'm very judicious about the guests that I bring on, because I know that your time is valuable, and frankly, my time is valuable. And we don't have time for theory. We don't have time even really for just empty ideas or empty help, or people who admire the problem, as one of my bosses, General Miller, used to say. We got enough people admiring the problem. We need practitioners who have a perspective that can help us navigate the problem, because you're the leaders that are going to get us out of this. So I want to put guests in front of you who are going to help you think it through. And today is absolutely no exception. Dear friend of mine, Mr. Ron Nakamoto. Ron and I haven't known each other that long. In fact, it was September of 2020 that we met at one of the two live in-person keynotes I gave in 2020. All my other keynotes were remote, but I was fortunate enough to give a talk at NAFA, Iowa, which is an insurance and Financial Advisor Association. Wonderful, wonderful organization. And I was there to give a keynote in Iowa, and was able to actually do it in person. And Ron was there as well, leading a discussion on empowered wealth. In fact, he's the CEO of Empowered Wealth, and they focus on the pillars of gratitude, true wealth, and leadership to fulfill on the goals that financial advisors want to fulfill on. And I heard him speak. I was sitting in there. He didn't know that I was one of the speakers. And when I'm not speaking, what I like to do at these things is, and I recommend this to you too, is anytime you're at a conference or something like that, if you're presenting, is, don't just go in the room and give your talk. Is move around and really hear the other folks out there that are putting their perspective out there, because it's phenomenal, and it'll normally inform what you're talking about. And this was no exception. Ron, as soon as I heard him start talking, I was captivated. Just his quiet demeanor, but just miles and miles that he's run. You can just tell he's run the miles. And I knew right then that he was someone I wanted to connect with and bring on the podcast. And I did. And he's here with us today, coming to us from Texas, talking about locally empowered leadership in a time of crisis. So Ron, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let me correct a couple things.
Please
First
do.
of all, I'm the former CEO of Empowered Wealth, now
Okay.
the CEO of EW Plus, which is, as you might surmise, is sort of a derivative of, but I have some independence in how I do my work now. So I'm
Gotcha.
able to work with people like you with unfettered, which is a good
Sure.
thing, right? Uh, and it is true that my background is as a financial advisor, and now I train financial advisors. So people would, probably naturally wonder, well, what does that have to do with leadership, right? What does that have to do with leadership at all? And I would say that really, I would come back to some of the things that you talk about leading yourself first. You know,
Yeah.
you got to take care of your own business first, and I think that's how we connected. Was
Yeah.
just because so much of my work with financial advisors is, hey, get your head straight first before you start dishing out advice to other people, and
Right.
learn how to connect with people like you teach and train people. And that's, certainly that's what I've derived a lot from your work, is how to connect with people. And then, the things that I've brought to the table in my little world is, a focus on gratitude, which begins with respect. And
Right.
somebody, you know how it is when one of your students starts saying the things that you've taught them
Yep.
and they mean it. You know how gratifying that
Yeah.
is, right? So
Absolutely.
one of my students told me, hey, I finally get that, respect is the foundation of a civil society, because we don't have it right
Oh, wow.
now.
Yeah, you know what? That is so accurate, and it's interesting that you bring that up about the respect piece. And I want to go ahead and pull the thread on that now. You know what?
Go for it.
Actually, no. Let's do. Tell me. I want to come back to the respect. We're going to pick it up there, and then we'll bring our two paths together, Ron. But first,
All right.
tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. You alluded to it a little bit with your path as a financial advisor, but just give us a little bit of your backstory and how you got to where you are now.
Boy, I'm gonna commandeer your podcast if I'm not careful. But I'd say this: a couple of highlights. So I'm Japanese American, uh, but I was born in America. My parents were born in America. My family's been here for over 100 years, so I'm American all the way. But you guys, some of you may remember that we had this little skirmish, in the 40s called World War II, and you may recall that the Japanese were the enemies. And so I grew up in a world where um, the the kids of people who fought the Japanese in the Pacific were my peers, and they picked up a lot of this vibe that the Japanese are one, the Japanese are the enemies, and two, Japanese are crazy, because you probably have heard the stories about the Japanese warriors and and how they would, fight till the death and all that stuff. So I view that as kind of kind of a building up a bad reputation, undeserved bad reputation growing up. So I've spent most of my life kind of fighting that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my world is I grew up Buddhist. It still shows, I think, in a lot of the my mannerisms, my behavior, the
Sure.
words that I use, and that kind of stuff. And so I grew up in that kind of tension, you know, external prejudice and hatred, Buddhist philosophy, way of dealing with things. And
Yeah.
to me, that tension still exists, hatred,
Right.
delusion, prejudice still exists. It just takes different forms. You know, you saw
Yeah.
it when you were, you've been all over the world. You've seen hatred, prejudice,
Sure. Sure.
delusional
Yeah.
thinking. You've seen it everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so
Absolutely.
what kind of mindset, what kind of whatever it takes in order to deal with that, that's been sort of my life's journey. In the meantime, it's like a lot of things. Um, I didn't really have a calling as a financial advisor. I think you had a
Hmm.
calling to become a soldier, right?
Yeah, I did.
I remember, I remember you telling me the story about seeing the guy with the green beret, and
Yeah, yeah.
you wanted to be that guy. Well, I didn't want to be, gee, that financial advisor. Look at him,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Right.
But so I sort of backed into it. But now I'm 37 years into it. 33 years as a certified financial planner.
Right.
So I was there sort of on the ground floor of the industry, and now I'm sort of in a way, an elder statesman in it. Um, but it was always an industry that was, about selling stuff to people,
Yeah.
um, and I really bristled, against that. And so it was always to me about serving people. And believe it or not, that's been a challenge, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of greed in financial services, and a lot of financial advisors are greedy people, and a lot of their clients are greedy. And you know, so a lot of my work has been to say, well, there's a little more to life. There's at a deeper level, family, connection, faith, those kinds of things are worth a lot more than money, and a lot of
Yeah.
people don't get that. But I think we can now. My challenge, my passion is to find people who want to help other people with that in mind, is to use money productively. I'm okay with people being wealthy as long as it doesn't fuel greed and self-indulgence and hatred.
Yeah. Yeah. And
You
I
know,
think that's what another, touch point that you and I have. We both see it that way. And frankly, when I heard you talking about your philosophy uh, in how you train financial advisors. And you know what? I talked to several financial advisors who've worked with you, and just the reverence they have with the work that you do and what you stand for. I mean, I was drawn to that immediately. And you know what, Ronnie? What it strikes me as is what you've just described. And look, I work with a lot of financial advisors and really, really solid folks who make a big difference in the world. I mean, I think it can be a true calling. Um, but if you think about the financial sector or the financial industry, you're right. I mean, obviously, it's super transactional, and in many ways goes against the grain of some of the old school aspects of interpersonal relationships and things like that you and I are very big on. So it strikes me that what you've had to do in the financial sector, certainly in the financial services sector, in bringing your principled approach is exactly what's kind of going on in the country today. I mean,
yeah.
what was that like? Well, first of all, tell us a little bit about how you approach um, your methodology and what it's built around, and how you see that as relevant in the world today. Because I think that's exactly what we need to dive into. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we're facing. But just tell us a little bit about your approach to how you train your financial advisors.
Probably in a similar way to the way you would do it if you were in my shoes. You ask people a question. The typical question I ask people is, "What is wealth?"
Yeah,
And then, most people go, "Well, it's money and stuff." And I go, "Well, what do you value more than money?" Well, you know, I mean, if your family, your health, your faith don't pop up pretty quick, then you're probably, you've kind of lost your compass a little bit. You know what I mean? And to me, um, if the money's not making that better, then that's a sign. So what I
yeah,
talk about is, you know, I mean, look at I tell a story of I won't mention names, but I had a client 25 years ago And he was, I joke, he was a billionaire when $1 billion was a lot of money. But it's true. This guy, you have no idea how much he was worth $3.5 billion, right? So
Right.
you have no idea how much money that is,
Yeah.
and what he was capable of doing. But he had 6 kids. He was alienated from all 6 of them. Not one of them would speak to him. He was on his 4th marriage, and you know he just had no family. So I asked myself, well, what good was the money?
Right.
What was that good for? You know, now he eventually did a few good things. I mean, hey, maybe he couldn't repair those relationships, so he did do a few good things, and he's deceased now, and his name is on a few buildings here and there. But
Right.
it causes you to think, right? It
Yeah.
causes you to think,
Yeah.
what's the purpose of money, and what is wealth really? So to
Yeah.
me, we've defined true wealth. It's kind of a, I don't know, it's almost kind of like a fake term, but it's, true wealth. And we define it as your core, the things that are essential to you. So we have kind of a big 3: family, health, and faith. So if you
Yeah.
don't have those, you're just kind of untethered in the world. You're just kind
Yeah.
of floating aimlessly. And
Yeah.
then, you're a big advocate for lifelong learning and growth. So we call it experience, but really it's about growing in a positive way, right?
Yeah.
If you're standing still, then you're starting to fall behind, right? You've got to grow and keep growing.
Yeah.
And
I think you're starting to die actually if you do that. I think you actually
yeah,
start to,
yeah, absolutely. Well, and we agree on that. But with that comes joy. Certainly, it
yeah.
comes suffering and sorrow as well. But
Yeah.
with it
Absolutely.
comes the ability to achieve, the richness that is life, and then contribution. That's, kind of that's your sweet spot. How are you giving back? How are you
Right.
contributing to making the world a better place? If your wealth, your money, your time, energy, and attention isn't, you know, devoted to contributing to the well-being of others, and it could be through your profession. I hope it is, right? I hope your career and your job lines up with that. But if you're not doing that, then you're kind of trending towards selfishness and self-centeredness, and that's where things start falling apart, is when you get too insular, self-centered, greedy. That's where you start developing contempt for other people, or envy, those kinds of things. And you
Yeah.
know those are
Yeah.
that's the beginning of that downward spiral.
Yeah, and Ron, you talk about contempt. I mean, that's a great setup, and that kind of brings us back to where we started this conversation, where you talked about one of your students said this absence of respect, which is the found, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it is the foundation for certainly a functioning civil society, a liberal democracy.
Yep.
And it's just funny you say that, because the other day I was on a Zoom call with another elder statesman named Edward Lujan. And this gentleman, his family has been in New Mexico for many, many years. He's the dad of a good friend of mine, in the insurance industry.
Hmm.
And, just he's been, gosh, what was it? He was the head of the Republican Party in New Mexico, but he was one of these gentlemen who was revered on both sides of the aisle. He just a true statesman. And I asked him, I said, Edward, when you think about, by the way, also, this is the gentleman who was the visionary and founder of the Hispanic uh, uh, Heritage Center for all of New Mexico. Um, and I asked him, I said, what's missing from leadership today? And without missing a beat, one word: respect.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's obvious to people. Hopefully it's obvious to people, and hopefully they can. I mean, I challenge myself. I challenge all the people that I work with to, are you really showing respect? and it's it's easy with people that you love and your friends and all that stuff, but you said in a lot of your work, uh, it's very difficult with people that you maybe just that you disagree with vehemently. Politically, they're on the
Yeah,
opposite side of the fence. That's the challenge, but that's, I think, where your work really shines and stands out to me, is that you make a conscious effort to uh, to show respect, to meet
yeah.
people where they're at, and to um, put down your weapons and sit down and seek to understand. And
Well,
that
and we
to
had
me,
to, we had to learn that the hard way. We had to learn that the hard way in lots of places, but certainly for me, it was tribal Afghanistan, and it was after 10 years of getting it wrong. The reason that I talk so passionately, Ron, about the levels of contempt that you mentioned yourself, the reason that I talk so passionately about the levels of contempt as alarming for our society is the same reason that Sebastian Junger in his book Tribe calls our attention to contempt. And the simple reason is that citizens, are speaking of their neighbors with the same level of contempt one would normally reserve for one's enemies in wartime. And I will tell you that even in war, where it was really nasty, you didn't see a lot of warriors speaking with contempt about the Taliban or Al Qaeda. There was to some degree, but there was, even with our enemies, there was a level of respect that went with that. It didn't mean you weren't prepared to take them out, to kill them, but there, you had some of that. You had this dehumanization and contempt, and I've been guilty of it myself. Um, but at the end of the day, I saw firsthand how 10 years of just disrespect, contempt, corrosive approach with the locals in Afghanistan got us nowhere. In fact, it got us, actually, we moved backwards. And it was only when we decided in 2010 to take a local approach, to meet people where they are in these villages, to live alongside them, help them stand up on their own, and more importantly, bridge beyond our group and their group, and connect that way. And that's when things actually started to happen. And that's what I'm worried about in the country today, and in the world at large, is that we are treating each other with contempt. And I just feel like that doesn't end well.
yeah, I totally agree with that. In fact, I was thinking while you were talking that, you know, um, for me, I'm big on trying to replace bad habits with better ones.
Yeah.
And to me, the whole habit theories and all that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
was thinking, why don't we make the word contempt a trigger? Like whenever you hear that word, and if you're feeling it, or you identify that you're experiencing contempt, that should trigger something, that you should go into a different loop, like
I
into the
I agree.
respect loop. You
Yeah.
know,
But you know why I think that's so hard? And this is where I think these kind of platforms, Ron, and these kinds of conversations, and everyone who is watching or listening to this, I think this is why it's so important. You care if I riff for just a second on what I think it is, because I
go
want you to
go
weigh
for
in
it,
on.
go for it.
So you see this iceberg behind me, right? And if you're listening to this, I'll describe it as well. But in my research, in my work around human connection, and I've been doing this for about 3 decades now, both in uniform and out of uniform, and I've worked with a lot of prolific thinkers. What I've landed on, Ron, is that human nature. We've been around as modern humans for about 250,000 years, and longer than that as hominids,
Yeah.
a million years.
But Homo
Um,
sapiens, yeah,
yeah, and so the our operating system is really, really old, and I equate it to this iceberg that you see behind me. And the modern world that we live in, that you just described as a financial advisor, The modern world where these conflicts are happening, where elections and inaugurations and pandemics, that's that tip of the iceberg. It's 20% of really of who we are as humans. It's that transactional, contractual part of our nature. And it's very new. I mean, even as consumed as we are with our iPhones, our social media, that's just a few years old. Below the surface, though, is this tribal primal creature. It's our hardwiring. It's if the top of the iceberg is the writer, that 80%, that large chunk that's below the surface, is the elephant. And here's my thing. That's the part of us that is honor and shame and hospitality and revenge. It's all of those primal characteristics that have helped us navigate the world and formed groups and tribes for thousands of years. And there's a light side to it and there's a dark side to it. Sebastian Younger talks about the values of tribe and community, but also, there's negative aspects in terms of like feud and vengeance.
Revenge.
Yeah, and scarcity. When you look above that waterline, you have abundance because we've evolved socially into a society that Mark Weiner calls contract society. It's this society where rule of law and a constitution and a free market allows individuals to pursue their own dreams, their own liberties. But below the waterline, that's not that way. It's a group society. It's a clan society, and the only way you acquire enough resources, just like any other animal, is to group and fight and do what you have to do to acquire that. But if you want to excel or ascend as an individual, it requires leadership. It requires certain things to be in place. And this is all very new, very experimental. But we all seem to kind of like it. But granted, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, certain groups have not been afforded those opportunities, and we've got work to do. But at the end of the day, Ron, I assert that individualism, rightly understood with a sense of community back to our past, is exactly where we need to be to solve the future problems. But in all our modernity and in our rat race and running so hard, those material quests that you talked about to the extreme, we have lost our connection to what's below the surface. And as a result of that, nature has her way and the surface starts acting on us unconsciously. And that's what I believe is happening in the country today, because we have disconnected from our nature and we don't understand really who we are at our core, and we don't honor those attributes. Then we start to take on the dark sides of them, such as tribalism, feud, revenge, and that doesn't end well. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I hardly know where to begin, but well done, in terms of, I think, explaining where we're at and adding, a lot of nuance to what it is that, characterizes our current dilemma. So part of it is, how do we climb up, above the surface, right? How do we get forward? And I think that goes back to your call to leadership. I mean, if left to our own devices, our tribal tendencies, especially, they've been all kind of provoked, by the events of of 2020 and now early 2021. And I think we need to find a way to, or it would be best anyway, to find a way to short circuit that, right? Cut it off in some way. And it'd be good if someone somewhere would say, hey, maybe I was wrong, or maybe,
right,
regardless of what I think, I want to hear what you think, and how you're going through this. And can we agree that, we want a better world, that, the reason why you're, threatening violence or, doing all, engaging in all this behavior is that you really do want a better world. right? That would,
Yeah.
and that better world looks like something where we all have, some amount of freedom, and that
Right.
there's a certain amount of collaboration and all that kind of stuff. Can we agree on what that vision is? And is there somebody out there that says, "Hey, I forgive you. Let's
Yeah.
let's let's listen.
Yeah.
Let's move forward." Right?
And the thing is, this is where I think the localized empowered leadership needs to come in. Is if we're waiting on the leaders in power right now to do that, I think we are going to be waiting a very long time.
Yeah.
I don't.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, I see. Again, I've introduced this term divisionists, and it is an apolitical term. I believe you qualify as a divisionist if you surrender to a polarized position to the point that you divide in order to advance your agenda. And again, we all have in groups, we all have ideologies, we all have agendas, we all have goals. But if you put those ahead of a bridging trust society where there is truly individualism rightly understood with a sense of community that bridges beyond in groups and allows for reciprocity and social capital across groups, and we have a common story. I was talking, there's a book, Ron, I would love for you to check out. I don't know if you've read it. It's called The Human Givens.
No, I haven't.
um,
I haven't.
and it's a fantastic book. um, and it's really, at its core, I think it was written by and for mental health experts, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, but its contention is exactly what I just talked about here, which is that humans, regardless of our race or our religion or our ethnicity or our socioeconomic status or how modern we think we are, there are certain human givens that we all need and that are all present in us. And those givens are essentially our psychological needs and the innate resources in this amazing instrument that helps us meet those needs as we navigate the world. And those stem from physical needs like water and food and shelter, but also safety, and then there are emotional needs that go with that. We are very emotional creatures as humans, but we've become so materialistic, contractual, transactional, and fast paced that we've lost touch with those human givens, those things that are below the surface. Some of them, have to do again with safety. Some of them have to do with intimacy. Some of them have to do with just basic connection. But if we don't maintain a grip on those things and understand what they are, and as leaders, show up that way, we're going to continue to spiral into this very, very primal in-group, out-group approach where we're fighting over a scrap of bread instead of
Yeah.
bridging toward a common narrative. And this is one of the gentlemen who, he didn't write the book Human Givens, but he's very involved in dispute resolution. He's a Canadian diplomat. He said to me, one of the things that America is struggling with right now, and I think he's right, is that we've lost our common narrative. We've lost our
Oh,
common
absolutely.
story. And we
Absolutely.
really need that as a society. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that if, in some ways there's conflicting narratives now,
Yeah.
or competing narratives maybe is a way
Yeah.
of describing it. And not having that shared narrative, it speaks to that leadership element, inspiring that shared vision,
Yeah.
so who out there, is inspiring a shared vision, rather than a
I haven't seen him. Have you?
rival. I haven't,
I really haven't. I on either side, I haven't seen anybody who is truly speaking to an inspired vision. And if it's okay, I want to take that a step further, because one of the
please.
things that Robert Putnam, A
Right.
well-known social scientist says in his book, The Upswing and Bowling Alone, he says that he's seeing a lot of data where Americans in particular in this polarized society are indeed polarizing to their candidate or their person. And then even though it's super polarized and it's clear that it's polarized, they're not surrendering any degree of commitment to that individual, even when it goes to the extreme. In other words, we're lingering around these divisionists,
Mhm.
far longer than you would think that that citizens of a liberal democracy would do. You'd think at some point, like you said, when you start to see the trigger of contempt, you step away from that. And one of the things that I want to offer up, and it's a below the waterline thing, I think because we've lost awareness of our own nature. One of the things that the human givens talks about is that when our emotional needs are not met, the instrument starts to find ways to meet them. We start to look for ways to meet our needs. And so
Mhm.
when we become angry, the body the mind has a response to that anger. And as it
Mhm.
continues to accelerate, it goes into a trance-like state. And that's their
Mhm.
words. You go into this trance-like state where you are physiologically oriented on what you have to do to survive, and that emotion of anger is driving you to the extreme to do that. Now, what I tell people all the time is in combat, for example, when you're in a gunfight, the bullets get quiet. The bullets get quiet. And the
I've
reason is
heard you
because
say that. Yeah.
you don't need to hear them, right? The physiological attributes of
Narrow your
your body
focus. Yeah.
are focusing on the central things that you need to have. Well, the same thing happens when we go into that trance-like state of anger here in the United States. When we look at how people are acting, they are literally going into a trance where their emotional temperature is so high that they're not in charge of their own faculties. And what they say in the Human Givens is that when that happens, you lose that perception of those finer skills to look at that bridging trust, to look at that common narrative, and it becomes fear-based behavior to preserve resources or status. And I'm just interested in your take on that with all of your work in mindfulness and true local leadership. How does that land with you? Have you seen evidence of that, and how do you think about that as a leadership coach?
Um, Two things, three things, four things. What I would say is that I think it's true. Where I was going with it, and I think that you and I share this, is to, how can we frame those in terms of questions that people can respond to?
Yeah,
And to me, uh, if we're uh, being triggered to anger, how can we, you know, lower the temperature, as you would say, on anger where it's not productive, where it's not leading to bridging, but instead going to bonding? And then how can we associate anger with sort of um, the drive to create more of a connection, bridging sort of society world? It's like I told, I've told people my sense of anger is in um, is my feeling that people are growing farther apart, and that
right.
some people are trying to drive a wedge between us, so the
Yeah,
divisionists, as you would put it. So my anger is directed towards those people. And
agreed.
my question is, how do we neutralize them, and how
Yeah,
do we use the energy? Because I think you can agree that anger creates energy. It's
it
just
does. It does.
how can we
Yeah,
channel that in order to drive forward with this idea that, hey, I may be angry, but I really want to champion listening and respect, and appreciation for the other person's perspective, and
yeah,
let's drive towards a more generous way of looking at each other, and let
right.
me set the example. Let me make
Yeah,
the first move. Let me take the first step, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
let's sit down, and let's
And you,
put our
yeah.
weapons down.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ron. And I think we should unpack that anger toward the divisionist thing a little bit, because what we're talking about on this podcast is that you, as a local leader, nobody else is coming. And what I learned in several decades as a Green Beret is that leadership is local. If we want to have an impact in the world, and everything that I ever saw that ended up being a strategic outcome, leadership wise, was typically iterative and local and bottom up, and it was cumulative. And over
Hmm.
time, and yes, over time you do have some big leaders that swing the stick, but it started long before that. It was like Putnam talks about in his book The Upswing. In the early 1900s, there was a low point in American history, much like today, but leaders one by one started to step into the arena when they saw no one else was coming. They started Alcoholics Anonymous, the Shriners, the Rotary Club, the NAACP were all formed during that period, and they created this long running period of upswing of social capital from like 1910 to 1965. So my thinking is we can operationalize that upswing again, and I believe that. And I think there's a lot of other leaders out there who believe that way, but they've been drowned out by the divisionists, and it's hard to not get angry at them. So I have two thoughts on that I'd like to offer up to you for comment. One is, I do think there are straight up divisionist leaders who know exactly how this iceberg operates, and they have abandoned their posts of stewardship for preserving individualism rightly understood with a sense of our past and community, in favor of in-group behavior toward a specific agenda. And they know who they are. They know who
Hmm.
they are, and I know who they are. And if you're
Yeah.
listening to this, you know who they are too. But I'll go ahead and call them out anyway. There are a lot of politicians are doing it on both sides of the aisle. Let me be clear. A lot of groups that are advancing group agendas are
Hmm.
are are divisionist. Um,
Hmm.
a lot of social
Opportunist.
media, that's
Opportunist.
right,
Yeah.
opportunist, and it's about power. And then finally
Hmm.
are the 24-hour news cycle are
Yeah.
masters at divisionist approaches, as are social media architects. Now, all that said, that is a very small part of the equation, and B, we could fire them in a moment's notice as a citizenry, all of them. We could decide next Tuesday that we're all turning off our phones, and it would be done, right? And I'm just saying that because we have that choice, right? We're not at a point
Hmm.
yet where the hardcore divisionist leaders who aren't acting this way consciously have the reins. They don't. But the second thing is, I also think there are a lot of folks who are participatory in divisionism that are in that trance-like state, who are actually
Hmm.
really decent folks. They've been caught up
Hmm.
in the churn, and they have cumulatively elevated their emotional temperature to where their sympathetic nervous system of fight, flight, and freeze is firing on all cylinders. And we
Yep.
have to find a
They're
way.
enablers. They're
That's
enablers.
right. And I think to some degree have been caught up, and we need to help bring that emotional temperature down. Maybe it's you. Maybe
Yeah.
as you're listening to this, I mean, anytime you speak with moral superiority over another group, you're in that divisionist camp, right? That's my opinion and my belief. And so I'm interested in what you think about that, Ron. If that framing is relatively accurate, then I think the good news is that if we can model, like you said, what right looks like at a local level, then just by definition, emotional temperatures should start to come down.
Yeah. I think so. I think so. I think that to me, the your divisionists are enabled by people unwittingly.
Yeah.
I think they've gotten caught up. I think people in when you have COVID, when you have the kind of the economic fallout from COVID, um, you've got the election, all the misinformation and just kind of information
Yeah.
overload that goes with that. Social media,
Absolutely.
24/7 news cycle, um, the supercomputers in our pockets,
Yeah.
just the compound effect um, makes everybody somewhat complicit if you turn on your phone, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you're there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
there. And we're I think you've referenced this in some of your podcasts, but the what Tristan Harris says in The Social Dilemma and all this stuff, I think is true. It's like we're addicted. We're addicted,
We
and
are.
big
We are.
tech, big tech has, you know, maybe conspire is a strong word, but they've certainly, in their own self-interest, have created this world of addicts,
Yeah.
addicts for all this
Yeah.
stuff. So, I think, yes, we could all turn off our phones, but the likelihood of that happening is very low because of the high level of
Yeah.
addiction.
So
That
I'm just going to take that on for a second because I think it's really
please,
important that because I think
please
it's a
do.
huge contributor that we've got to do. And so I am an alcoholic. I gave up my anonymity a few years ago because I feel like talking about my alcoholism is actually more important this day and age than hiding it. It's a personal choice. I did get sober through a 12-step program, and I've been sober 20 years, right? And if you saw me, Ron, if you saw me when I was drinking, we probably would not be having this conversation because I was not in a place where I could do that. In fact, I was so addicted to my drug of choice that it was all that I really focused on. And anyone who saw me or knew me at that time would say, no way in hell, no way in hell, this guy's ever given that up. Not going to happen.
Mm,
But the first thing I had some people come into my life and they helped me understand that I needed to admit I had a problem, and then I needed to take certain steps that would enable me to have this thing removed from me. And it happened for me. Like, I can only speak to my own experience. But my point is that I think you're right. I think that what we're looking at with all of this above the waterline stuff, to include social media and these mobile devices, and the fact that, once again, because we've lost connection with our deeper primal selves, it's being exploited like dopamine bursts from our phone
oh,
when a buzzer
absolutely.
goes off. Like, that's all primal. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
unless we can admit and recognize the depth of this impact, and then start to ask ourselves, okay, could we move toward individualism rightly understood again? Is that indeed something that I, as a human being, want for my kids or for my family or for my country? I want a country that has abundance and individualism rightly understood with a sense of community. And we make the decision to do that, and then take actions that would help us do it. But it's going to require a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, um, despite the fact that it's challenging, I think we need to start. And we
Yeah,
need to do it, as you said, at a local level. I do have a question and a
yeah,
request. It's really a request. Could you speak to individualism rightly understood?
yeah,
What
absolutely.
that means to you?
Yeah. In his book, The Upswing, which I've read a couple times now. Again, Robert Putnam is a social scientist who has made a very, very strong assertion that that America's been here before, right? That in the early 1900s we faced a lot of the same social ills, division, polarization, hopelessness, perceived hopelessness that we do now. And through a
Mhm.
series of bottom up and top down actions by leaders of various ilks and races and ethnicities, we found a way to restore social capital at a very high level, all the way up until 1965, where it started to go down again. And in that book, early on, in order to kind of frame what this experiment in democracy is. He talked about a guy named Alexander de Tocqueville who came over from France
Mhm.
to America during the early 1800s to get a sense of and report back to France on what the hell was happening over here. What was really going on? What was this thing called democracy, and is America something that should be taken seriously? And he wrote back in a series of very prolific pieces that America, he was very impressed, that what America has figured out is this unique aspect of individualism rightly understood. So in other words, it was a balance between a society that it valued the individual above the clan or the group, which is unheard of, right? That's unheard of. Like that civil society for thousands of years has been status society, just like any other mammal. Your
Yeah.
obligations are to your group, but yet
Yeah.
there's this individualism here, but yet it's rightly understood. There seems to be this innate sense of community, of tribe that underpins that individualism and keeps it stable. So in other words, there is this individualism above the waterline and this rightly understood sense of community below the waterline. It was as if Americans had a foot above and a foot below. We knew where we were going and we knew where we came from, right? And now still, again, this is at a time when we still had slavery, for God's sakes, and women weren't voting. So by no means was it, the city on the hill, but it was very different. And it offered, an approach to individualism and an approach to achieving one's dreams that he had never seen. And I think,
Yeah.
when I think
There was
about
no there was
a
no
metric,
historical precedent. There was no
right,
historical precedent
right.
for it.
And I've just found from a framing perspective, when I lay that out, it seems to resonate in terms of what an aim point might be in our civil society for something that we could all kind of rally around.
Yeah, to me that strikes me as individualism uh, redefined now. 21st century individualism, having been through what we've been through,
Yeah,
COVID, George Floyd, all that stuff, this election period, the Capitol Hill stuff. I think we're at a place in our history where we need to, where it would be an opportunity to redefine what individualism means. Because I know a lot of the people who are rioting and protesting and who are threatening violence to this second right now are doing so in the name of freedom,
yeah,
aka,
yeah,
aka individualism.
yeah.
And to me, it's an opportunity. I think we almost need, as on a societal level, to say, yeah, we're for freedom, we're for individualism, but rightly understood in our modern context. And that does
Absolutely.
not mean, yeah, it
Yeah,
does not mean, tearing through Congress and threatening people's lives and destroying public property and things like that. It means something
absolutely.
different.
And as we've seen, that's happened. It's happened across political parties. It's happened across ethnic groups. It's happened across socioeconomic lines. And everyone points at the other party and they say that's wrong. That you cannot do that. But then there's this at the same time. There's this justified behavior
Yeah.
for something like that occurring in your camp. And my point is, I think we have to go one level deeper and we have to say, now hold on. Rightly understood means we're gonna just hold the phone on our positions for a second. And we're going to attack the issue of how we treat each other when we have those conversations, bringing it all the way back to where you and I started, which is this issue of respect, civil discourse. We need leaders who are going to insist, I believe, at a community level and in your own personal arena, this is how we're going to treat each other. This is how I'm going to show up and treat you. And this is what I'm going to ask how you treat me. Can we agree to that? Yes, we can. Okay, then let's have a conversation. And the only way to do that, Ron, is we've got to shake off this trance. We've got to get more familiar with how these trances occur, these extreme movements into anger and fear. We got to get a foot below the water. And that's what we're going to do here in the podcast. Is we're going to go deeper on that. I'm going to pull back the curtain with as many guests and personal insights as I can on how do we get that? I think we've got the individualism part. How do we get that rightly understood part? What does that mean? You're right. We need to reframe, redefine. And then I think as leaders in our own arena, we can start to implement that at a local level and model what it needs to look like.
That's great. That's great. I think that, this calls for a higher, a greater level of maturity amongst our citizenry. I mean, I think that, but we have to start at the fundamentals. To me, respect, when I talk about it, it's like, let's go back to when you're 5 years old or something, it's like, please, thank you, you're welcome. It's giving people the benefit of the doubt. It's, the respect is about bestowing some basic dignity to oneself and to other people.
Yeah.
And that comes.
No,
please go ahead.
No, you go, please.
To me, that's where I'll go back to my story. I grew up in a world where that wasn't always something I could take for granted. Like I was saying, hey, my peer group, their fathers fought in the Pacific against the Japanese. So we were the Japs, even though I'm an American citizen, and my father was an American citizen, right? And my mother was an American citizen. But, to them, they're triggered, right? So there's no respect. There was no respect. And I had to earn their respect. And I didn't figure that out right away, right? For me, respect was, all right, if you're going to try to beat me up, then you're going down with me, right? So I had to learn the hard way, what respect is all about. And to me, we're right there again,
We are, Ron. We are. We absolutely are.
But it can't be about neighbor against neighbor.
It can't. Yeah, that's the downfall.
We got to be better than that.
And what that can result in, I talk about the churn. I believe that the reason this matters is because, yes, it creates conflict at a localized level, and that degrades our efficiency. It makes it very difficult to have a society of abundance and free will when there's this level of conflict. They can't coexist. You can't have abundance and conflict. It doesn't work. That's replaced with is scarcity, and ultimately organizational and societal collapse. It's a sinkhole, and you can see evidence of it already. We've already seen little snippets of what that churn sinkhole looks like after George Floyd's death at the Capitol, and that's just a small little foreshadow of what societal organizational collapse looks like. I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand, and it doesn't end well. And I want to go back to your experience as a Japanese American. And I want to really bring that home to anyone listening to this, anyone watching this, is that Ron's experience where, from the sons of veterans of the Pacific campaign, I'm sure that those young men felt very justified in demonstrating their anger and contempt for what they perceive to be the enemy. But do you understand that is absolutely no different, absolutely zero difference? It is the same contempt and moral superiority that groups right now, that Republicans are showing over Democrats, and Democrats are showing over Republicans, liberals over conservatives, conservatives over liberals, mask versus no mask. It is that primal, innate, below the surface feud. It's the dark side of tribalism that we are now at the mercy of because we're in that trance-like state. We have surrendered right? That connection to our humanity in favor of that. And it is timeless and it will take us down. And so my ask to anybody listening or watching is that, Ron talked about how do we get away from the triggers, and the questions we ask ourselves is, are you speaking with moral superiority over another group right now? Or have you in the last 6 months? And if you have, then I'll just call it straight. You are part of the divisionist camp. You are not part of a bridging trust movement. You are part of a divisionist movement. And if you look at the level of polarization, Ron, that's right down the middle of the country, it doesn't work. The numbers don't work for that approach.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're really right on that. And I think, I know for myself, I mean, I'll confess, I've felt a sense of moral indignation from time to time, but then you have to catch yourself and go, well, you know, what do you want? You want to be feel superior to other people, or do you want things to get better? You
Right.
know, do you want
Yeah.
what kind of world do we want? And
Right.
so to me,
Right.
part of it is just, all right, I confess, I admit, I admit, I've been wrong about some things. I've been wrong about people, and I've judged people, and let's how do we get beyond this? How do we
Yeah.
move forward in a positive
Yeah.
way?
Yeah.
How do we lead towards something, that's going to be better, as opposed to trying to figure out who's more wrong,
Yeah.
you or me,
Yeah. And let me be clear. I'm not advocating abandoning one's values or principles. As a Green
You can't
Beret, like,
anyway.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't. Yeah. I mean, that's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that we learned after 10 years that bashing people in the face is not going to get you to a level of social capital that equates to individual liberty and abundance. It's not going to work. And advancing your agenda at the downfall of another group who is an American citizen is not going to work. It is flawed to the core. And so I think what we do next, Ron, is like, I don't think there's any one answer. I don't think that it is an approach to leadership where what I do think we can do is start to open the aperture on recognizing what's below the surface in this aspect of human nature and how we really connect and how we lead people in effective ways, and then start to utilize those techniques. And again, that's what we're really going to get into on this podcast. You've helped me break it out beautifully, and I really appreciate. I knew you would, and I'm excited about what we've been able to open up. Now we've just got to keep going deeper. So before we close, though, what did we miss that you wish we would have covered, or what do we need to say, or what do you feel like needs to be said that didn't get said today that will help move this podcast, and more importantly, this effort to empowered local leadership further along?
I'd say, I mean, there's a lot I could say, but certainly I've come to view leadership as benevolent influence. And to me, we're all able to be influencers, and even if it's in our own smallish worlds. But the reason I work with financial advisors is not only because of my background, it's because each of them, has hundreds of clients, right?
Right.
They can be influential in their own local way, and now with COVID has put us all on Zoom, so local is a different meaning. It's not just geographic now. We can reach. I mean, I assume you're in Tampa right
Yeah.
now. I'm in Texas, and I've been on the phone with Europe and Australia and the northern states today, right?
Right.
So, yeah, and it wasn't that long ago that would be unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
But here we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
So it's the same technology that's blowing up our our psyches and, you know, get, kind of overwhelming our body chemistry and our amygdalas and all that stuff. The same technology provides some potential for us. And to me, if we're conscious of benevolent influence, if we're conscious of how we're conducting ourselves, it's going to take an extraordinary level of self-awareness, self-control, and self-management. But, ex-military, one of the great things about military is your level of discipline, and how you're human like all of us, right? You have these emotional reactions, and you highlight that in your work. But you spent a good chunk of your lifetime applying discipline to the way you go about doing things. And to me, that's admirable, and it's something we can all learn from. And
Yeah.
so
Thank you.
that's
Thank
how
you.
that's
No,
what it's going to take.
yeah, that's really well said, Ron. And I was just sitting here thinking, as you said that, it's very ironic that the podcast that we're doing right now, we're going to put that out on social media and all these other platforms that we said are having an effect on us. But again, I think it gets to your point of redefining individualism rightly understood. The same thing with, a foot above the waterline, a foot below the waterline. We are in the modern world. We are going to use social media platforms and other digital platforms to reach and connect and have an impact, but it needs to be rightly understood. And it is going to require a high level of discipline and work in that regard. As I'm speaking right now, I hope all of my veteran brothers and sisters are hearing Ron's words. And, I know that for veterans in particular, watching our nation go through this is extremely, extremely disturbing. It's really tough. But my ask of you is to dig into that same level of discipline. You know what right looks like. You know what leadership looks like. Is don't let it take you down. Is that we need your leadership now more than ever. We need everybody at a local empowered level, but certainly our veteran population. Let's take heart here and recognize that it's what you've been through in those trust depleted places that you can model what it looks like. Ron, one other thing you said that I'm going to come back to you for a farewell, but is you talked about, oh gosh darn it, what was it you said? Man, we've covered so much, and I just, how it was just on the tip of my tongue. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I'm going to bury you with one more
Okay.
comment.
Yeah.
Then how's this? I'm going to
Yeah.
pile on while I got a chance. So at the moment the Capitol was being overrun last week, I was standing in a river in Western North Carolina, which is probably pretty close to where you spent some time when you were younger, I would think.
Absolutely.
But I was standing in the river fly fishing for trout with a Army veteran. Wow. He was my guide. He's a fly fishing guide now in North Carolina, and I mentioned to him that I was speaking with you. I had recommended your podcast to him, and he and I had a good, healthy conversation, about what it's going to take in order to make a difference in the world. And he offered up, and I took him up on the offer. One of the things that I was doing with him was talking about how we could use fly fishing as an experience for veterans to help them,
Absolutely.
get back to nature and kind of regroup as human beings and take their strengths, which is that discipline and that ability to focus and to fight for a cause, right?
Yeah.
And he was all over that. So I would just say this is that he and the owner of his fly fishing business are all talking about how to go about doing this and do it specifically for veterans. So I want to offer that up.
Connect us, Ron. I do a lot of that work with our nonprofit. I appreciate you having that conversation with him, and we'll certainly, that's how it gets done. And I remember what I was going to say, and it speaks to that, which is take a look at your arena. Take a look at the arena that is where you live, work, and play, and look at the level of influence that you have, that benevolent influence that Ron talks about. Well, it's the same as leading people to the rooftop. It's inspiring them, not forcing them. And it's human connection. It's leveraging this stuff below the waterline and bringing it up to the top of the waterline. Active listening, being an empathetic witness, storytelling, stuff that we're going to dive into in here. But when you hear that little voice in your head saying, well, what can I do? Like, I can't have any influence. It's those people in the extreme center, or it's social media. It's the media that's doing it. No. Leadership is local, and your arena is much bigger than you think. And we have unprecedented access today to levels of influence digitally that were not existent when Robert Putnam talked about that initial upswing in the early 1900s. Yet it was the longest running period of social capital in American history. Imagine what could happen with the technology that we have today, that if we just leveraged in our own arena, we started to model what bridging trust looks like, what treating each other with respect, removing the contempt, and focusing on how we treat each other in the context of civil discourse, what that could do, and then call out the bad actors who do it. My final challenge to all of you is this. If you've stayed with me long enough to this point, you're willing to hear this challenge. Are you willing to call out the divisionists in your camp? Are you willing to call them out? Because most leaders, even the ones with great ideas and great frameworks, are not. They are so caught up in their own semi-conscious biases that they can't do it without it being pointed out to them. And even then, they stick to their guns. So that's my question to you as we close this out. Are you willing, as you continue down this road, to call out divisionism even in your own camp? Because that's what it's going to take. And if you're going to go with us to the rooftop, that's what you're going to have to do. Ron, I can't thank you enough for being on, my friend.
All right, testing 1, 2, 3. Yeah, thank you, Scott. It's been really an honor. I follow your work very closely. I admire what you've accomplished and what you continue to do, and it's been a great honor to be on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, pal. And listen, also, I'd like you don't have to answer it now, but give some thought into some other thought leaders. You've seen the context that could come in here and be great guests on the podcast. Wes will reach out to you separately on that. But to everybody listening, again, my challenge to you, this is not going to be an easy road. Empowered local leadership of the kind that we're going to need, skilled leadership in the face of the churn, is going to take new skills, new recognition of what's down here below the surface that you've detached from, and then techniques that, interpersonal skills that it takes to reach down there and connect. That's what it's going to take. And so we're going to go deep on that. And it's going to require everything you've got to do that. But the reward is a society of individualism rightly understood, where our kids actually have abundance and bridging trust and an opportunity for everybody to chase their dreams. And I think that's something we can all get our heads around if we can just bring the emotional temperature down, lose the contempt, and reach out and call these leaders out that are causing the division. Right? It's going to take some time, but we got this. Share this podcast with a friend. Go back and listen to it if you need to. But this is the journey we're on. Thanks for what you do, and I'll see you on the rooftop.